We are now going to shift to the theme of the rest of the morning, which is on education. And we are delighted to have invited Mathieu Cassotti, who is from Université Paris Cité, who is going to talk to us about how we can grow our children's creative minds. So after his talk, we will have a break before the rapid fire talks and panel.
As you want. I can try both, but is it okay for you? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present you our research on the development of creativity. I'm very glad to be here, even if it's very difficult to present something just after Andrea's thing, so I'm a little bit impressed to do it. It's more modest work, but I would like to show you that we can answer a very interesting question regarding developmental, the development of creativity using a more qualitative approach of creativity. And when parents have questions about creativity and the development of creativity, the two very important questions that they ask to me is, are children more creative than adults? And do school kill creativity? It is the two stereotypes that we have very often. And I say stereotype because evidence in the scientific approach of creativity do not support this question. And the answer, I don't want to kill the suspense of my talk, is no. No, children are not more creative than adults, and school don't kill creativity, or it depends on the school. And next step after this talk, there is an ongoing debate of how we can stimulate creativity at school. And the other question, it is not really a question, but it is very typical of what's happened in France. In France, they can think that children can be more creative than adults, but teenagers, no, it's not possible. Teenagers are not creative. They are bad in mathematics. They are bad in everything. So it's maybe very typical of what happened in France. I don't know in other countries, but it's very difficult to convince media and people that teenager can provide very creative solution to problem. And let's go back to science. And this is just a representation of the development of general development of creativity. Creativity mainly assets using divergent thinking task. And as you can see, there is a linear increase of creativity with age, but with some specific period it's more difficult to generate creative idea. And even if there is many debate about, for example, the first grade slump, there is slump embedded in creativity. It is mainly depend of the task you use to assess creativity. So the general result is that it increased from childhood to adulthood, but after you go to some details, there is specific moment in which it might be more difficult, but it depends deeply on the task you use to assess creativity. And because I don't really like the alternative uses task, and because I come from the field of decision making, we chose a specific another approach to ask questions about the development of creativity. And in the domain of cognitive approach of creativity, there is many different studies focusing on the cognitive biases in problem solving and why it is not so easy to solve creatively a problem. And this cognitive bias, there is many studies, but the most important one and the oldest is the study of Dunker. Sorry, I just see that there is an error. It's Dunker with C key, is not just key. But as you know, maybe the candle problem in which you have to fix a candle to the wall so the wax doesn't drip on the table. And what is interesting in this task is the problem is exactly the same in two conditions, but depending on whether you frame the box as a container or you don't frame it as a container, whether you prime the fixation of the typical function of this object, you can have different results. And if you prime the typical function, typically people fail to achieve the correct solution. But if you don't prime it, it's very easy to use the box with non-conventional uses, for example, as a platform. So depending on how you frame, depending on how you frame typical function, you can change your ability to solve creatively a problem. In children, we cannot use candle because it's too dangerous. So there is adaptation of this task. And this is one example that we can use to assess creative problem-solving ability. In this task, it's very easy. You just have to help a Bobo, which is a little lion, to reach his friend, a dog, and you have to build scaffolding to help him. And there is two conditions: either the tools to solve the task is within a box, or you have the box and other objects to solve the problem. So it depends on whether you prime or not the typical function of the box, to achieve the solution, you have to return the box and to use the box in an original way. That is to say, you have to use it as a first step of the scaffolding. So it's not very complicated task for adults, but for 5-year-old children, it's more difficult. And the first initial study by German and Defetter have demonstrated a very surprising result for it is not a linear development of our ability to overcome fixation, because 5-year-old children are better than 6-year-old children to solve this kind of task. They are immune to fixation. If these tasks are not impacted by the way you frame the problem. They suggest that it is because they are more flexible representation of the function of object, mainly because they can play with objects in different way. But this was initial result in recent replication of this data with the same methodology by Anaël Camarda. I've show different results, and I provide evidence that even, but maybe it's because it's in France, in French children, but at 5 years old, we have demonstrated that evidence that there is also fixation effect. So it doesn't mean that fixation do not develop, but it means that there is discrepancy in the results, and our results with a bigger sample confirms that you can have fixation effect at 5 years old. And using other type of task, you can also see that you can have fixation effect in younger children and also in non-human primates. So fixation effect exists, and fixation effects exist even with younger children. It makes very difficult to solve creatively a problem. But one issue with this kind of problem-solving task is that you only have one good solution. You don't have to explore many different solutions. There is one good solution, so it is not a divergent thinking task. So we try to generalize this kind of fixation effect inspired by what's happened in design science by using other type of tasks in which you have to solve a problem. But there is very quickly many solutions that come to mind and that can create fixation and constrain your ability to explore other solutions. It is why we use this the egg stack, maybe you know, to make sure that an egg drop from 10 meters does not break. And what happens in your brain if you don't know the task, or if you know the task, is that there is many different solutions that come very quickly to mind. And maybe, I hope it's work with you. Maybe there is 3 different categories of solutions that come very quickly that are not original at all. But it's true for adults. It's also true for children and adolescents. It consists on protecting the egg, on dumping the shock, using mattress, using swimming pool, using what you want, and slowing the fall, for example, using a parachute. These categories of solution represent the large majority of the solution provided by the participant, even if you ask them to be creative. It's true for engineers, it's true for designers, industrial designers, it's true for students at university, it's true also for top manager in French industry. So it's we replicate this finding, this kind of finding many times, but there is other solution that you can reach, and you can explore different solutions if you want to be more creative. For example, you can modify the natural property of the egg by freezing it. I have a freeze eggs in my house since the beginning of this work. You can also try to train a bird to catch the egg. You can change the environment. There is many different solutions you can achieve. We use design approach to map the solution, not only the solution provided by the participant, but we try to use design tool to generate many different categories of solution before using this task with children and adults. And what we observe is that 90%, 80%, but sometimes it's 90% of the solution belong to this fixation category, in which it is not very creative. But there is also other kind of solution you can achieve thanks to this qualitative approach, which not only focused on creativity score, but also the nature of the solution people, individual, adults, but also children can provide it. I think it's an interesting approach, especially if you want to go to real life problem solving, because if we want to go to real life problem solving, we are not interested only on the creativity score we can obtain, but also the nature of the idea we can explore to design and to do something after. So to go beyond idea generation, we have also to focus more qualitatively on the nature of the idea we can explore. What is interesting here is that you can reinforce fixation effect by providing some example. If you provide, for example, if you give them that they could use a parachute to slow the fall, just you gave them this kind of experience of example, you strongly increase fixation effect. It's more difficult for them to explore other alternative of solution. If you provide them a more original creative solution, it's help adults, but it's not always true. We do not replicate, we replicate a lot of time the fact that example can constrain more creativity, but we fail to replicate numerous of times the fact that creative example can stimulate creativity. So example, we obtain mixed result, but it's more easy to reinforce fixation than to overcome fixation. So let's go to fixation effect in children. We have 10 years old children to solve this kind of problem. And we basically replicate what we observe in adults. So they try to dump the shocks, they try to protect the egg, but they don't think to slow the fall. It's not meaning that they don't have the knowledge. They know what is a parachute at 10 years old. They know what is a parachute. They have the knowledge, but they can, it's not an intuitive strategy they use to solve this kind of task. They don't think that they could use this kind of strategy. If you provide them an example, you can use a parachute, you increase the box and they can generate many different solutions within this category of solution. But the way we develop intuition to solve this kind of task that could lead to fixation effect develop with age and knowledge. And one good example of this difficulty for children to solve this type of task and showing that they don't have enough knowledge to correctly propose this kind of solution is that this is the only group who suggests us to drop the egg, but slowly. So it's just giving you an example why it is difficult for them. Adolescents can have more knowledge about how to slow the fall, so they provide also a similar fixation than adults. As I said before, you can use the egg tag, but with this kind of task in which you have to solve a problem, you can also use more real-life problem solving and relating to sustainability. It might be also interesting to see that it is not a question only on decision. We have to do something for changing environment, but it is also a specific difficulty to generate alternative solutions. Even if I want to change my behavior, sometimes it's difficult because I fail to generate creative or alternative solution to do something. And This is exactly what we did with this task, in which we asked them not to drop an egg, but to make sure to eat without wasting food. It's a critical challenge for our society, but it's a very difficult task, because when we ask this, and we made also, using a design approach, we made a mapping or many different categories of solution you can provide to this task. And what we observe is that participants, it's true for adults, but it's true also for children, fail to explore solution and creative solutions that it is they can do, they should explore. They focused only on a limited number of low creativity solution. And typically they try to buy less. So to avoid wasting food, they buy less, they eat less, they make sure to eat things they like. This is a fixation effect we observe in children. 8 years old children, we observe exactly the same thing in adults, and adults also provide, oldest participants also provide new response consisting in leftover food to animal or recycling leftover. But what is interesting is here, it's a complex problem solving, and 8 years old children provide exactly the same solutions than adults at university. So there is two different interpretations we can have for this. Either children are very creative, or given the example of solution I provide to you, adults fail to overcome the fixation effect. And fixation effect exists at least at 8 years old, as they continue to constrain her ability to solve creatively a problem. For this kind of problem about sustainability, is critical today to include the question of creativity, and not only how we can stimulate the willingness to do something, but how we can help also people who want to do something to generate creative solutions, because there is cognitive bias suggesting that all the solution exists and we only have to choose between the solution. It's not true. We need creativity to explore to explore original solution to solve this kind of problem. And here it's only the question of idea generation, but the next step, and this is what ongoing study with one of my PhD students, and we work with children and adolescents to develop and to go beyond the idea generation, to do something within their school, and how they can use design approach, design tool to create really solution to solve this kind of problem. So we have identified that there is fixation effect developed with age. The next question is how we can use model coming from the field of reasoning to make specific prediction about the processes involved in this ability to overcome fixation effect. And of course, cognitive neuroscience in adults have really helped us to identify this. But as I come from the field of reasoning, I try to use model coming from the field of reasoning to overcome cognitive biases, and we use dual process theory. I know that dual process theory is an heuristic model of what happened. It's a very it's a simplification of what we in terms of process, but it's critical to ask a new question in the domain of creativity. And this model helped us to identify at first that intuition is not necessarily good for creativity, and that intuition can lead to fixation, and to overcome fixation. And it is true for reasoning, it is true for decision making, but also for creativity. In cognitive neuroscience of creativity in adults have demonstrated that it is a critical process. We also need executive function and cognitive control, inhibitory control. Inhibition is not bad for creativity. Inhibition can help us to overcome fixation. And we have provided different evidence relating to this conclusion. The first one was come from dual task paradigm, in which we use cognitive load during creative task. And what we observe is that there is not a stimulating effect on creativity, but when you load inhibitory control, it's more difficult to resist to fixation effects. So it suggests that executive function is positive, not only for reasoning and decision making, but also for overcoming fixation effect in the domain of creativity. We also have other studies using not the egg task, but using also the alternative uses task, in which we have correlation between executive measure and cognitive control measure and her ability to provide remoteness alternative uses of a specific object. And in this task, we try to reinforce fixation by providing an information about the typical function of the object and this relationship between inhibitory control and the ability to overcome this kind of fixation in the domain of in alternative uses task have also support using EEG data. But most importantly, studies in the field of reasoning have not only identified that executive control might be helpful for resisting to cognitive biases, but they also demonstrate that people are smarter than we think. They are biased, they fall to trap, but they are able to detect that there is something wrong in their reasoning. And how they demonstrate this? By asking them not only to solve the problem, but also to provide confidence they have in the response they provide. And by asking the question of confidence, they can assess to what we call conflict detection. That is the ability to detect that there is something wrong. They fail to overcome cognitive bias in the domain of reasoning, but they are able to detect that there is something wrong. And this is the first step. Before inhibiting cognitive bias, it's important to identify that it's wrong. So we use this reasoning in the domain of creativity, and we focused on judgment, on creativity judgment as a proxy of the confidence in their ability to generate creative solution. And we developed a specific experimental paradigm to have more complex to have creative task in which there is a conflict between fixation and the task, and to have another control task in which there is no conflict. But this more complex experimental procedure, the only result we obtain is that adults, experts, fail to fall to the trap and fail to overcome fixation, but they are able to detect that the response they provide within fixation are less creative than the response they provide outside the fixation. So even if they fail to provide many different solutions outside fixation, they are able to detect that what they provide is not so creative. So the judgment, but it's true for adults, but their ability to evaluate creativity is this kind of task is still not developed during adolescence. Adolescents have a performance in terms of creativity very close to the one of the adult, but they fail to detect really what is very creative when they provide a solution. So their ability to intuitively or not, we don't know. So there is a debate with if conflict detection is a metacognitive, is consciously metacognitive process of it is an intuitive process, but adolescents fail to detect that their idea is not so creative. Relating to this and to metacognitive evaluation, we can also, thanks to the work of Matthias, for example, we can also make a distinction between what people judge as creative and what experts judge as creative. It makes the difference between the two and see whether this ability to correctly evaluate what is creative and what is not creative can be related to our ability to be creative. What we observe is that there is an overall estimation of creativity in children, and maybe relating to the stereotype we have in adolescents in France. Adolescents, in contrast, under-evaluate the quality and the creativity of their response. So there is a developmental difference, not only in the performance, but also in the way children, adolescents, and adults can evaluate the creativity of their response. And there is correlation between the accuracy of your evaluation and the quality of the nature of the solution you can provide. So your ability to generate creative solution to a problem is higher with when you are good to evaluate the solution you provide. Again, another very important result we obtained by asking people to evaluate themselves is also that a small part of participants, very small one, maybe 5% of the participants are able to provide a very creative solution, but at the beginning of the task. The very first solutions they provide, intuitively, we just gave them 5 seconds to generate the first ideas that come to mind, and 94% of the participants fail and provide a response within fixation. But for some people, and we don't know why, they can intuitively generate a creative solution. And I say intuitively because it's under time pressure. We don't use cognitive load yet, but it's ongoing study. But it's very in line with what we observe in the field of reasoning, because in the field of reasoning, even people who can correct their response, people who can provide and overcome bias, can do it very quickly in the process. They don't need really deliberation for solving the problem. In the domain of creativity, we need deliberation to overcome fixation, but some people don't. And some people are able to provide original solution at the first step. And it's an evidence that intuition, creative intuition exists, but for very few number of people. I say this because we also try to explore the lifespan perspective in the other task, and we observe very surprising results. It was not expecting given our model, so it means that the model have to change and is not enough. Basically, the hypothesis we made is if executive function is needed to overcome fixation, older people, because we know that there is a decline in executive function process with age, should have more difficulty to overcome fixation. It was the first hypothesis, but it is not what we observe at all. And what is very interesting is this first result. We have never seen this kind of result with many participants, is that when you look just the first response provided by the participants, for young adults and middle-aged adults, you have many of the solutions, the large majority of the solutions they provide are within fixation. But for older people, it's 50-50. It's the only group they can provide the first response is more creative. I see you smile. Yes, it's a message. It's an unexpected result, but interesting one. The older people can first, with their first response, provide a creative solution. So, of course, they are not less creative than youngest group. They are more creative. There is less fixation and more expansive solutions. That is to say, solutions that is outside fixation. And it's true also if you use typical scoring about originality, but it is not at the end of the task. It is really at the beginning of the task. They provide first idea, more creative than the two youngest groups. So our hypothesis is that it is not relating to a better ability to overcome fixation, but maybe more to associative process and the fact that they are more accumulate knowledge, maybe they can activate more distance association intuitively. But it is only an hypothesis. We cannot interpret these results thanks to the model, because the model predicts that you need executive function to overcome fixation. But given that we have intuitive logic, maybe there is intuitive logic and intuitive creativity, maybe older adults can intuitively activate more distant knowledge and solve this kind of problem. But it's a surprising result, but very interesting one for our modeling. Very important for the field of creativity when we focus on the question of adolescents and children is the fact that creativity deeply depends on the social context when you are where you are. And in the cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience, very often we focus on the cognitive process. But when we study development, we know that there is many different social contexts that could have an influence and deep influence of the performance, of the creativity performance of children and adolescents. Especially, we know that adolescents are very sensitive to social context, social pressure of their peer, but also social evaluation. We know that in adults there is many different studies showing that social pressure can have a negative impact on creativity. And in a study with Anel Kamarda, we have tested this negative impact of social evaluation on children and adolescents on the egg test. It's very easy. You just have a condition in which you are alone and you have to generate orally solution to the egg task. In another task in which you have an expert, we have two experiments, one in which it was an expert and one in which it was a peer, just a peer. And they are here to evaluate the creativity of the solution during the generative processes. And what is interesting, but unexpected again, is that social contexts have a huge impact of the ability of children and adolescents to provide original solution to this problem, to the egg task, but the impact is opposite on children and adolescents. So if you don't have the social context, you can think that there is a developmental trajectory of their ability to overcome fixation effect. But if you include the social context, everything changes. And everything changed. For children, it's very difficult to generate creative solution when they are under social evaluation of an adult. It's horrible. For adolescents, it's exactly the reverse pattern. It's helped them to be motivated to solve the task, and they are more creative under social evaluation than all. It is only a first step. And now what we would like to do is to understand how social evaluation modulates the activation of each system. Is it an impact on the question of executive function or intuitive system, or I don't know, but we have to go to the mechanisms to understand how this social evaluation can have an impact, but we observe it and it is opposite during development. The first part, very first part, I know that only 1 minute, but I think it's important also. We try to make a connection between the field of reasoning and the field of creativity. We take some model from the field of reasoning to test hypotheses in the field of creativity, but we also observe that creativity can be used and should be used more in domain of cognition where decision-making is in the norm, in the normative way to think the process. And very often, in cognitive field, I will show you an example with moral judgment, but it's true also for risk-taking. We view people as a decision maker. We only have to make a decision between options, and psychologists give the option. But I was always asking myself, say, where the option come from, and why they do not focus on the question of generation, because before choosing, you have to generate the option. And sometimes the paradigm we use in the domain of decision-making is more like a false dichotomy, because they force a choice between two options designed by the experimental, but they don't give the opportunity to the participant to generate their own option. And in real life, sometimes you have the choice, but sometimes you have also the choice to decide to generate other alternatives. So it's when we do this, for example, in the domain of moral decision-making, as you know, maybe the trolley dilemma, in which you have to make a choice to sacrifice one people to save 5 or not, they constrain the decision-making process with 2 alternatives. And they say that intuitively, people are agreed to push a button to sacrifice one people to save 5 other guys, but they don't want to push the guys on the track. So there is many interesting results coming from here, but what we do is very easy with NL. We just add another option. And the other option is more costly because you have to make time to generate alternative solution. And even in people think that it is intuitive for participants to press a button to sacrifice one guy to save 5 other guys, and we replicate this finding when we just have to make a decision. We show that it's not true when we provide us the possibility to generate option. When we give us this opportunity, they don't want to choose, they want to generate. And what they generate is very interesting because they have 2 minutes to generate, so there is also creative solution. But for us, the key finding here is that intuition, what is intuitive here is not to press a button. What is intuitive here is to generate solution. And we have to go beyond decision-making model to integrate the question of idea generation and to see how what we know about cognitive development and cognitive neuroscience or creativity may help us to reinterpret some finding in other domain. It is a conclusion, but it's basically what I have already said. I would like also thank my collaborators on all this topic. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much.